Morning all, and thanks for joining. Today I'd like to talk on the topic of harmonising the fields of invasion science and forest pathology. This presentation is based on a paper that has its origins in a workshop hosted by the Centre of Excellence for Invasion Biology, which was held in Stellenbosch November last year. The theme of the workshop was frameworks used in invasions. Myself and Alberto Santini attended, but co-authors include Mike Wingfield, Trina Burgess, and Joey Hulbert. Invasive alien species are widely recognised as a significant driver of global environmental change, and they have far-reaching ecological and socio-economic impacts. The role of globalisation and increased trade and transport are clearly linked with the rise and introduction of alien species. This threat continues to grow, and there appears to be no end in sight to the accumulation of alien species worldwide. While invasive alien species are represented by organisms across all taxonomic groups, taxonomic biases exist, and much of the body of work in the field of invasion science has been focused on plants and animals. Many key texts fail to mention microbes, and if they do so, it's only briefly. Invasive forest pathogens have caused and continue to result in dramatic and devastating damage to commercial, natural, and urban forests globally. To highlight a few: Phytophthora cinnamomi, ash dieback, chestnut blight, all devastating outbreaks that have fundamentally altered ecosystems, resulting in entire species being practically eliminated from landscapes. Consequently, it's concerning that invasive forest pathogens have been substantially underrepresented in invasion science. But equally concerning is that most studies of forest pathogens have been undertaken in the absence of a connection to the frameworks developed and used to study biological invasions. So we decided to interrogate the history of the two disciplines to look for insights into why the two fields have remained relatively disconnected. The Greek philosopher Theophrastus was the first to study and write about diseases of trees, but it was not until the mid-1800s that the role of pathogenic microbes in causing plant disease was understood. Those of you who caught Jackie van der Waal's lovely presentation last week will hopefully remember that it was Anton de Barry back in the 1860s documenting the life cycle of Phytophthora infestans and his experimental evidence demonstrating its role as causal agent of late potato blight that established modern plant pathology as we know it today. Forest pathology emerged soon after as a branch of plant pathology dealing with diseases of woody plants. The German forester Robert Hartig is widely regarded as the father of forest pathology. His work characterized and linked Heterobasidion anosin to conifer root and butt rot, and in doing so he refuted the long-held notion that decay was responsible for the spontaneous generation of fungi, by instead showing that fungi were the cause of decay. Forest pathology has been strongly shaped by the influences of microbiology and health sciences, quintessential to its plant pathology roots. However, forest pathology is also a subfield of forestry, and as such has dealt with long timescales and diverse environments, much more so than classic agronomic crop-based pathology. But it's probably fair to say that two diverging branches have arisen within the field of forest pathology, and this has come about as a result of the two broad settings in which forestry is undertaken: commercial plantations and natural forests. Now these are quite broad generalizations, but the kind of silviculture practiced in the southern hemisphere is dominated by plantation forests, which are generally very simplified systems, arguably closer to agricultural crops than natural forests. They're often single species, increasingly clonal, utilising exotic trees, and consequently the focus of forest pathologists working in these environments has remained more closely linked to the mechanistic approach of plant pathology. Again, broadly speaking, while there is some plantation forestry in the Northern Hemisphere, the experiences of forest pathologists there have tended to come mostly from a silviculture based in native species in natural or semi-natural environments, and this has led to a less mechanistic and more ecological approach to forest pathology. Let's turn now to the field of invasion science. This is quite a young discipline. It's widely agreed that Charles Elton's 1958 publication, The Ecology of Invasions by Animals and Plants, which described in detail for the first time the biology of invasive organisms, kicked off the discipline. By the 1980s, there was growing concern about the impacts of non-native species invading novel environments. And between 1982 and 1989, the Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment, SCOPE, pulled together a large group of ecologists from around the world to document the problems that invasive species posed. It was from this foundation that the field of invasion science emerged as a discipline in its own right. Just to note that the accepted definition of invasive alien species is a self-sustaining, that is, naturalized or established, population of a species that has been accidentally or intentionally introduced by human actions to an area outside of its native geographical range, into an area where it is not naturally present. It's worth noting that not all definitions include impact, though others specify that invasive alien species cause, or are likely to cause, socio-cultural, economic or environmental harm, or harm to human health. An important question to consider is how diseases of forest trees develop. If we look to the terminology of pathologists dealing with human and animal diseases, we can consider pathogens under the term emerging infectious disease. This is defined by the World Health Organization as an infectious disease that has appeared in a population for the first time, or that may have existed previously but is rapidly increasing in incidence or geographic range. Coevolution between forest pathogens and their hosts, together with pressures from competition, predation and parasitism, has contributed to the complexity and stability of natural ecosystems. Severe disease outbreaks by native pathogens under natural environmental conditions are therefore rare. Importantly, this coevolution between hosts and pathogens has occurred under a particular set of environmental conditions. Pathogens are therefore contained by geographical, taxonomic, and environmental barriers, but the lifting of any one of these barriers may result in pathogenic behaviour and the emergence of a new disease. Of the three means by which an emerging infectious disease can arise, generally only one, the crossing of geographical barriers due to human-mediated dispersal, is recognised by invasion scientists as a process leading to biological invasions. Within the context of forest pathology, a challenge faced when dealing with the emergence of a new disease is determining whether this is due to the introduction of an alien species or the consequence of a native pathogen that has been favoured by changing environmental conditions. And this is a scenario that's becoming increasingly common under conditions of habitat disturbance and climate change. But invasive forest pathogens are therefore a subset of invasive alien species and a subset of emerging infectious diseases, specifically those that have established by human-mediated introduction. And we can define them as pathogenic microorganism that has been introduced by human actions to an area outside its natural distribution, where it behaves as an agent of disease on woody plants. Perhaps as a consequence of the difficulty in assigning alien status to forest pathogens, we have preferred to use terms such as emerging. But in recent years, there's been a rising interest and acknowledgement of the importance of invasion science as a concept relevant to forest pathology. And this is reflected in the uptake of the term invasive in contemporary publications by forest pathologists. If we look at the results of a search conducted with Web of Science for articles published since 1995 that use the terms forest, pathogen and invasive, we can see the first 10 years there were very few articles that included all three terms. But from the mid-2000s, there is a sudden and constant increase in the number of papers including these terms, with this trend continuing to be reflected in the recent literature. Although forest pathologists have only recently adopted the invasion vocabulary, regulations regarding introduced pests and pathogens by far predate those dealing with invasive alien species. And this highlights the early recognition of the threat posed by alien pests and pathogens to the extent that it justified the establishment of international regulations. But policy and regulation is also an area where plant and animal invasions remain completely separated from pathogens, and current regulations are treated in different conventions. So this is an area that could potentially benefit from attempts to further harmonise the two fields. One of the key things that has set forest pathologists apart from invasion scientists is that we have often focused on local and microprocesses, using classical epidemiological approaches to investigate specific interactions between hosts and pathogens. In contrast, central to the field of invasion science, which finds its roots in ecology, is the development and testing of general concepts and frameworks. And invasion scientists have developed many frameworks with which to study pathways, processes, risks, impacts. Anyway, you get the idea. But these are often produced in the absence of any collaboration with microbiologists or forest pathologists. Consequently, these frameworks are not always useful or easily applied to invasive forest pathogens. And microbes come with their own unique set of challenges, which we'll get to shortly. But let's start with pathways. The CBD pathways categorization is accepted as a unified system using standard terminology and classifications to categorize the introduction pathways of invasive alien species. It provides for 6 main categories with 44 subcategories and distinguishes between those that involve intentional transport, unintentional transport, and movement via artificial corridors. By far the most common means of introduction of invasive forest pathogens is by accidental movement, often through the transport of plants or plant products. Within the CBD pathways framework, this is represented in the unintentional transport categories. So let's zoom in on these. Here we find 2 categories, containment and stowaway, and we can find a number of sub-pathways that we would consider as likely means of movement of pathogens. Forest pathologists have been known to use the term hitchhiker to describe microbes that co-invade with their hosts. This term has not been formally described in the invasion literature, although it does appear under the stowaway category. But our terminologies are really not well aligned. From an invasion science perspective, the term hitchhiker precludes biological connection to the organism with which it's transported. And from a forest pathology perspective, It makes no sense to consider an endophyte or any other kind of microbe in a symbiotic association with its host as a contaminant. You may ask, why does all this terminology stuff matter? It's just semantics, but it's actually quite important. Even within the field of invasion science, separate terminologies have appeared over the years as researchers concerned with different taxa developed their science and associated terminology along parallel but independent lines. And it led to the use of synonymous terms for the same processes and multiple definitions for the same term. This lack of agreement on usage of terminology was widely acknowledged as bringing an added complication to an already challenging field. And there's since been a strong push to align the terminologies and concepts across different taxa. So an important aspect in harmonising the fields of forest pathology and invasion science lies in harmonising our terminologies. Of course, we cannot ignore that studying microbes comes with a decent set of challenges. The lack of knowledge of microbial biodiversity and ecology, speciation and geographic origins present formidable challenges to understanding invasive forest pathogens. Just to touch on a couple of issues. Microbes usually escape visual detection during quarantine biosecurity plant screening. Many pathogens, especially within the Invasive genus Phytophthora, have accidentally been moved through the nursery trade of infested but asymptomatic potted plants. Further, due to co-evolution with their hosts in natural environments, many of the worst invasive forest pathogens were not even known to science prior to their establishment in a novel environment where they jumped to a naive host lacking resistance genes, causing severe disease outbreaks. Hybridization between previously isolated species or subspecies can also give rise to pathogens with increased virulence or new host ranges. And these are challenges not typically encountered when dealing with other taxa, such as plants or animals. But we live in an amazing era of rapidly advancing technologies. Molecular tools are increasing the visibility of microbes and making it possible to identify pathogens more easily and accurately. They're enabling us to greatly enhance our knowledge of these organisms and their ecology. Big data approaches are also being increasingly used to understand and predict pathogen traits, as well as environment traits, that can be used to better inform our understanding of invasion processes and environment invasibility. Now, this is a topic that really deserves a lot more time and attention than I've given it here. But if it's something that sparks your interest, then I would highly recommend the following 3 papers. They give great insights into new and exciting ways of investigating forest disease development. And hopefully, August this year, we'll see this paper published in a special issue of Neobiota. Large collaborative projects can also offer hope for a way forward. For example, the HOMID project, comprised of 23 partners from 15 countries, including us here at FABI, aims to take a holistic and cross-disciplinary approach to develop greater scientific knowledge and practical solutions to the management of forest pests and pathogens. Now, in case you find yourself asking, why does it matter? Why should we be trying to merge the fields of forest pathology and invasion science? Well, history has shown us that we're not very good at managing invasive forest pathogens, especially once they've invaded natural areas. So we should be looking to invasion science to better understand how, where, and why these invasions occur, in the hope that we can better predict and mitigate future invasions. Equally, invasion scientists need to acknowledge that microbial ecology is incredibly relevant to understanding and managing invasions. And to ignore microbes is to ignore a fundamental component of the systems that they aim to study and understand. Key to this is collaboration. Clearly, we already collaborate across many countries, but equally important is to ensure that we continue to strengthen our collaborations across disciplines. We have much to learn from each other. And if there is one thing that we need to take from our current situation, it's that global problems require global collaboration to solve them. While the pandemic resulting from SARS-CoV-2 has sadly led to nationalistic responses by some states, it has also revealed our capacity to work together. Scientists and medics all over the world have been sharing data, resources and equipment, and advising and supporting each other in a way we've never seen before. This spirit of cooperation is essential for facing the growing socio-ecological challenges of this era. And COVID-19 is showing us that we have the technologies and the information sharing capacity to make this possible. Thank you.